a buddy of mine that just recently talked about Frank's mustache yesterday.
Oh, right.
'Cause he was, he's the one that's kind of going through that divorce. So he's living at his parents' house right now. And he's got a new apartment. He moves in next week, so I'm happy for him. But he's complaining about how he can't stand living with his parents. He can't wait to get back on his own. And so I just sent him as a joke because he's one of those like not fully formed adults. Like he kind of needs someone in his life to keep him together because he goes off the rails if he doesn't have a girlfriend or wife to keep him in check or a mom. So,
right.
So I sent them Yo Mama off Shake Your Booty, and I said, here's your theme song. And
maybe you should stay with your mama.
Exactly. You know you're kind of ugly and stupid too.
That was autobiographical, apparently.
Was it really?
Yeah, that
makes sense.
That was Frank writing about himself. He very seldom did it, really, and if he did it, he didn't really let people know. But I remember an interview with him, and someone asked him who was that song about, because he was always writing derogatory stuff about other people, and he said, "No, that one's about me." And that was how. So it's a very rare insight into Frank's psychology. That one, that he felt.
Yeah.
Like, you can't imagine Frank ever feeling inadequate. He never gave any sign of it at all. You don't hear any stories about Frank being worried about anything. But there it was, in that song. Maybe you should stay with your mama. My favourite line is you should never smoke in pajamas. You might start a fire and burn your face.
That's a great one.
And there's a great solo on it as well, isn't there, in the middle?
Well, yeah, it's one of Frank's best guitar solos.
Yeah.
Or it's maybe not one of his best, but it's him at his peak of emotional guitar delivery.
It was when he was doing that sort of stuff on a regular basis, which he didn't keep up, There's some good stuff on the 1988 tour, but I think there was a point where he was on fire, and he could translate his psychology into the guitar notes. And that's what he was doing. He was imagining things that annoyed him and putting it into the guitar solo. Brilliant.
And I've always wondered too, like, because I've heard a lot of arguments about Frank's skill as a guitar player, and a lot of it centered around when I was getting into jazz fusion, and I wanted to know about what John McLaughlin and Frank thought about each other. So I was always like Googling, like Frank talking about John and John talking about Frank. And there's interviews. There's one interview from each of them talking about each other's guitar playing. And I think first it was Frank. Somebody asked Frank what he thought about John McLaughlin, and he said something like, he's pretty good. He's like, I don't care for his compositions very much, and he's gotten really good at operating his guitar like a machine gun.
Yeah, I remember that machine gun quote. Yeah.
Yeah, and then John McLaughlin was asked years later, like, what he thought about that comment, and John said, I think Frank was just jealous I was better than him, and he said Frank played guitar solos that went on far too long, and they very rarely ever made the impact I think he was trying to make. And that was from John. Now, John's seen Frank live night after night after night because they toured with them and everything, right? So maybe he was right, but for me, I would much rather listen to Yo Mama guitar solo than anything off Mahavishnu Orchestra, you know what I mean, any day of the week. To me, I think Frank's guitar playing hits me much deeper than anything John McLaughlin's capable of. But that being said, John McLaughlin's guitar solos are like these weird angular beasts that it took me listening to him probably 100 times before I finally clicked for me and I realized what he was trying to do. And he is a genius, but I think John McLaughlin approaches guitar playing like a architect approaches a skyscraper, whereas I think Frank approaches guitar playing like some drunken wild man with a paintbrush who just spinning around the room making colors, which I prefer.
Well, Frank was a very good guitarist when leave the lead stuff out of it, just leave that to the side and think what about his rhythm parts and what about the compositional parts that he played. And there's a story about the recording of what ended up in Lumpy Gravy, I think, where Frank had hired a bunch of session musicians. You probably heard the story. And
probably, that's okay.
Maybe the podcast listeners haven't.
Exactly.
And it was a saxophone player, I think, who said, in fact, it's this guy that tells the story, the guy who actually was on the receiving end of this tells the story, that they looked at this music on the page, and then Frank came in, and someone from the band was asked to speak to Frank on the behalf of the other musicians, a spokesperson, and came up and said, Frank, we can't play this music. Nobody can play this music. And Frank said, if I show you it on the guitar, will you play it? And they said, this can't be played on guitar. And so Frank played it on guitar, and the guy said, we then realised what we were in the presence of, and we all did the best we could with it, and we got it done. But until that moment, we had no idea that we could play that, or that could be played. So that was the level that Frank was at in terms of what he could play on the guitar when he wanted to. And if you look at things like Roxy and Elsewhere, there's some great footage of Frank playing rhythm parts and all that kind of stuff. He's the primary guitarist there, I think. Is there another guitarist on that?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think he's playing all the guitar parts. So, and that is a kick-ass band that's playing all that stuff.
That's peak Zappa
That's
for me.
Peak
as far
Zappa.
As an ensemble.
So to say that Zappa was a not a good guitarist, that's because you've only listened to the lead playing and you don't get it. And I liked your description of he's like a mad painter. That's not a bad description, because what Frank was doing was painting with sound, or creating architecture with sound. He was decorating decorating the air, and he was less interested in the techniques of noodling than many others. And in fact, he avoided it. But if you go looking for it, listen to Overnight Sensation and listen to some of the guitar licks on that, and you'll hear what Frank could do when he wanted to do that kind of stuff, and it's as good as anybody. And I would take issue with Mr. McLaughlin. It's fair enough, as you say. He played with Zappa, knew Zappa's playing, firsthand more than I do, but I disagree with his opinion. I disagree with it.
I disagree with both of them. I think Frank was an asshole towards John, and I think John was just I think John was lashing back a little bit.
You think so? You think the machine gun comment's unfair? I think that I'm with Frank on that one. I think that machine gun playing actually is the antithesis of what I try to do, what I hear you doing, and what Frank was doing, which is to get something out of each note. And McLaughlin's notes don't hang around long enough to get anything out of them other than to register the fact that a note has passed. Was it the right note at the right time? Well, that's arguable, because you're going to have a mind like a steel trap to capture that. As you say, it took you years to understand it. I think there's a degree of bullshit on every side of every discussion when it comes to guitar solos. I mean, when it comes to the other guitar stuff, we can all agree that, harmonic structure and rhythmical playing and all that kind of stuff is very important, and there's feel and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to lead stuff, we lose all reason, and we just like the stuff we like. For years and years, I loved Steve Howe. I thought Steve Howe nobody would ever play the guitar better than Steve Howe. And as time went on, and I listened to more and more different guitarists, I went back to Steve Howe and I realised he sounds like an anxious old auntie when he's playing the guitar. It's all very tight and very sort of anxious, He's anxiously trying to do this, and he even when he plays it live, he kind of makes it look more difficult than it is, I think, at times. But so I think there's all different kinds of psychology come into the assessment of guitar heroes and whether they're any good or not. And they're all, let's face it, they're all fucking brilliant, really, at some level to somebody. They're all brilliant. And who are we to criticize?
Well, that's it. And from an outside observer who's like looking back at history in reverse and just going through interviews and whatnot, regardless of how those guys thought of each other, I think they were both incredibly influential on each other. Because I think it was 1972 is when they had their tour together, the Mothers and Mahavishnu, and it was right after their tour when Frank's guitar playing went from here to here. And I remember like listening to an interview with I want to say it was it was the drumming channel, I think, but it was Chester Thompson, Ruth Underwood, there was another drummer in there, Terry Bozzio, and somebody else. Yeah, I think I'm going to say it was Terry Bozzio. I think was hosting the interview, and they were just talking about Frank, and they got talking about Mahavishnu Orchestra. They're talking about Billy Cobham, about how terrifying it was to follow Billy Cobham, Chester Thompson. Like he was shitting his pants every night, knowing he had to go on stage after him. And which I think is funny. The only person on earth that shouldn't be afraid of Billy Cobham would be Chester Thompson, I think, But it's funny how that works. It's that imposter syndrome, right? Like you're looking at him going, what can he do? What can I do? Like we were talking about before. But apparently after a few nights of playing together, Frank stopped hanging around the dressing room and he spent the entire Mahavishnu set in his dressing room practicing guitar because he felt outstaged by John McLaughlin, according to Ruth Underwood.
Right.
That's what Ruth was saying. And she was saying, regardless of what anybody thinks, what Frank thought about John and about how much he dismissed guitar solos, Frank wanted to have that ability, regardless if it fit his musical palette at all. There was some competition going on between the two of them that was not spoken of outside of those two interviews I think I've brought up.
Yeah,
and,
that makes perfect sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad because like when you listen to Birds of Fire, which I think is the premier Mahavishnu album, like it's like their Dark Side of the Moon, it's very fiery. It's very like, other than like maybe one or two songs in that album, like most of it is like incendiary, just needles in your ear. And then after that, as they moved on, John McLaughlin's touch and feel got better and better, especially when he went and did like Shakti and those other things, and the guitar trio with Almi Di Meola and Paco de Lucia. He started coming back around. And I saw John McLaughlin about 5 years ago down in the U.S., and it was one of the best concerts I've ever seen. He played with, he was called John McLaughlin's Fourth Dimension, and he had Gary Husband there playing keyboards, which, I mean, he's an amazing drummer, but he's also a brilliant keyboardist. He had Nadia Michael Walden, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that properly, on drums, who also used to play with Jeff Beck and Mahavishnu Orchestra, amazing drummer. I think he played with Santana too. And he had this band, a musician named Jimmy Herring, opening up for him. And I'd never heard of Jimmy Herring before, but this guy is like an unknown jazz fusion genius. So Jimmy Herring played first. John McLaughlin came out and played a bunch of his newer songs. And then both bands came out together and they played Mahavishnu Orchestra songs together. And when Gary Husband did his version of Miles Ahead, which is one of the songs off Birds of Fire that I think is really worth listening to, I was just melting in my chair. I couldn't believe what I was watching. And it was just wonderful. And that's a band that's a musician I'll drive 12 hours for to go see if he's in town,
Yeah.
But
the only John McLaughlin stuff I have, I picked up a solo album of his recently. It was very electronic. I don't think I kept it in the collection. I think it's been squirreled away somewhere. I was very confused by it. It didn't seem like what I thought he would do. But the only stuff I have is the Shakti albums, which I love. I love the Shakti albums.
Shakti's amazing.
Yeah.
And they played a couple Shakti songs in that concert.
Yeah.
So I was really happy. And Nadia Michael Walden was doing all that, all that stuff while he was drumming. And I was like, that's so good.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Shankar's gone off a bit though. He's become very strange. I checked him out. I went down that rabbit hole because I've got a couple of his albums as well. Obviously, I have Touch Me There, which is the one that Zappa produced in London, which is a great album, and I have Who's to Know, which was his first album on ECM, I think. I might have a couple of others, but he took a major misstep with an album called The Epidemics. Did you ever hear that?
I haven't heard that one. No.
It was on paper. It sounds like the best album ever. Now I can't remember who plays bass and drums on it, but it's got Steve Vai on guitar and Shankar on violin, and you would think, well, this is going to be. It's one of the worst albums. I wouldn't say one of the worst albums. One of the most disappointing albums I've ever heard in my life. For two reasons. I got the CD and the CD had been mastered wrongly. It was, I think, they might even have used an RIAA curved master because there was almost no bass on it at all. You couldn't really hear it, and it was really, really trebly. It was very, very confusing and disappointing. And instead of being instrumentals or complex songs, it was 3-minute pop songs where Steve Vai played, as far as I could tell, more or less just played Barry major and minor chords. It was the most bizarre experience to hear it because it was these people don't make this kind of music. What the hell is this? So I would urge you listen to it just for reference sake, but it's a weird one. So Shankar always had that weirdness to him, that sort of pop sensibility, or a kind of really warped and unapproachable pop sensibility, which is the kind of direction he's gone in recently. So he's still recording, but he plays. If you look at videos on YouTube, he sings, and he wears some kind of wig. It's very bizarre. It doesn't look. It's not a good look. He looks like he's gone insane.
Oh yeah, I think John McLaughlin lost his mind years ago, but there's something about him though that just screams love. He has that same Steve Vai kind of attitude that he seems so positive. Like he never seems like he's having a bad day. He never.
Oh yeah, McLaughlin's,
he doesn't badmouth anybody.
Yeah, McLaughlin's a different kind of character. He's very much. He's very English, isn't he? He's very sort of.
Yeah, I guess he is, isn't he? I didn't even thought about that. For some reason, I thought he was American.
Is he American or is he English? I don't know.
He very well might be. I never even thought about his origins because he was born in England. He's definitely English. yeah, in Doncaster, South Yorkshire.
All right. Yeah, he's very English. He's got that stoic sort of Britishness, to him. Yeah. There's no hysteria there. It's all well worked out.
Well, it is, and you know what? In those group of guitar players, you got your Al Di Meola. Actually, I'll take him out of it because Al Di Meola sounds like an asshole. But like the John McLaughlin, Chick Corea, the Carlos Santana, Stanley Clarke, like all those musicians, they all seem like stand-up human beings. They have not a lot of scandal about them. They never have anything bad to say about each other. They don't like Miles Davis sounded like a train wreck of a human being, and those kind of guys, and the reason why I say Al Di Meola seems like an asshole is because I saw him live one time and it was very, very smug, like open shirt. He was on what he called his last electric guitar tour because I guess he has got bad tinnitus, so he tries to avoid playing electric guitar. He tries to stick with acoustic.
Oh, right.
And so he did a tour. He played Elegant Gypsy in its entirety for a tour, so I had to go see that. And he was making comments about like, yeah, you better enjoy it now because you're not going to see me when I'm 70 playing this shit like Jeff Beck, and I felt like he was knocking Jeff Beck for still playing guitar into his 70s, and it was like, and I thought, what a weird thing to say. And he was very sloppy that night.
Right.
Like he was very sloppy.
He was perhaps feeling feeling something slipping away at that point.
He might have been, yeah. And or it could have just been. I got the attitude that it might have been the first concert of the tour, and he hadn't practiced. That's kind of the vibe I got.
Yeah.
But it could have been a slipping thing too, because he's released albums since then that are phenomenal. But again, with studio, you get to release what you intend on releasing rather than what the world,
of course,
what you. It's always. I wouldn't say your best stuff because not every time you put your best stuff on a record. Sometimes you accept shittier stuff out because it captures a mood or something, right? But yeah, I think. I couldn't believe the attitude in this guy, and I remember one point there was one part he was being an asshole, but I thought it was funny. Some guy ran up to the stage to try and get a selfie of him, right? Like, so it was funny. Like he showed up with the camera, and Steve and Al Di Meola was about to pose a bit. Like you could tell he was like, "You want to take a picture of me up close? Cool." And then the guy put himself between the camera and Al, and Al just walked away. Like he was like, "Fuck you, you're not getting that picture," and. And I thought that was great because it was like I hate the selfie culture and all this me, make everything about like look where I am, look what I'm looking at, nothing ruins a good picture of the like a beautiful picture of a landscape, like your stupid face in the middle of it,
Yeah, because everybody's got a face. It's not unique, we've all got faces. Yeah.